The bell rang, echoing down the long hallway as the last of the students shuffled into room 302. Malik shuffled in with his head down, as usual. He was used to being ignored, used to the whispers behind his back and the stares he received when he entered the classroom. But today was different. Today was the day the teacher, Mr. Harris, would push the limits of Malik's patience, and maybe even his pride. As the class settled in, Mr. Harris stood in front of the blackboard, looking out over his students with that confident smirk he always wore. Mr. Harris had a reputation. He was tough, demanding, and had little tolerance for underperformance. And Malik? Well, Malik was often overlooked, dismissed as a kid from the wrong side of town. In Mr. Harris's eyes, Malik wasn't even close to being one of the bright ones. "All right, everyone, listen up," Mr. Harris called out, clapping his hands to grab attention. "Today, we're going to try something different. A little challenge, just to see what you're made of." His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of his students. "This one's not for the faint of heart. This is an equation that's going to stretch your minds, make you question everything you think you know. Only a few of you might even make it to the end." His eyes narrowed and landed on Malik. "And I'm willing to bet that Malik won't be one of them." Malik's heart sank. He had been trying to ignore Mr. Harris's snide remarks, but today felt different. Mr. Harris had made it clear, countless times, that he thought Malik wasn't up to par. Malik wasn't the best student in the class. He didn't come from a family with money or connections. But he had something hidden deep inside, something that could surprise everyone if they only knew. "Get ready for this, class," Mr. Harris continued, now writing an elaborate equation on the board. The chalk squeaked as it made contact with the black surface, and the numbers and symbols seemed to float ominously in the air. "This equation is a killer. Only the smartest will be able to crack it. So, let's see who really has what it takes." The class stared at the equation, a tangled mess of variables, exponents, and formulas. Malik's classmates shifted in their seats, their faces showing signs of nervousness. Some of them tried to write down what Mr. Harris had written, while others just stared blankly at the board. No one dared to speak up. The challenge had been set. Malik's fingers tightened around his pen, but he couldn't bring himself to look at the board. Not because he was afraid of the equation, but because he knew what was coming next. Mr. Harris would make his usual remark. He would ridicule Malik for not understanding, for not being good enough. And Malik hated it. He hated how Mr. Harris seemed to take pleasure in humiliating him. "Malik," Mr. Harris called out, breaking the silence in the room. "You've been so quiet today. Are you even trying to solve this? Or are you just waiting for me to tell you it's too difficult for someone like you?" The words hit Malik like a slap to the face. He could feel the eyes of every student in the room on him, waiting for him to crumble, to give in to Mr. Harris's expectations. But Malik was tired of feeling small, tired of being underestimated. Maybe he wasn't the loudest or the most outgoing student. Maybe he didn't have the best clothes or the latest phone. But he had something that no one could take away from him, a mind that was capable of far more than people realized. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his notebook. He was not going to let Mr. Harris get the better of him this time. With a quiet determination, he started to work through the equation in his head. As the class waited for the expected moment of Malik's failure, he ignored them. He focused. The equation danced in his mind, the numbers clicking together like a puzzle. The solution was just within reach. "You know, Malik," Mr. Harris continued, oblivious to the shift happening in front of him, "I really don't think you're going to get this one. This is more than just math. It's about logic, about understanding the patterns of the world. Something I'm not sure you." Before Mr. Harris could finish, Malik stood up. The classroom fell silent. Malik walked up to the front of the class, where the chalkboard was still covered with the tangled mess of symbols. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment, feeling the eyes of every student on his back. "I can solve it," Malik said, his voice low but steady. The class went completely still. It wasn't like Malik to speak up, especially in front of the entire class. But something about Mr. Harris's challenge had awakened something in him. He didn't care about the whispers anymore. He didn't care about the way people looked at him. He just wanted to show them all, that he was capable of so much more than they thought. Without waiting for permission, Malik picked up the chalk and began to work through the equation. His hand moved across the board, writing out each step carefully, the numbers and symbols slowly making sense. He ignored the feeling of Mr. Harris's gaze burning into his back. He couldn't be distracted. Not now. The class remained silent, and even Mr. Harris found himself momentarily speechless as Malik continued to write, his concentration unbroken. The room was filled with the quiet scratch of chalk on the board as Malik solved the complex problem, step by step. Each solution seemed to come with ease, as though Malik had been waiting for this moment his entire life. When Malik finally finished, he stepped back from the board, his chest rising and falling with a steady breath. The equation was solved. And it wasn't just solved, it was solved flawlessly. There was a long pause. The students were stunned, and for once, the usual chatter and whispers of the classroom were gone. Mr. Harris stood at the front of the room, his face pale, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He had expected Malik to fail. He had been sure of it. But now, standing in front of the class, Malik had done something that no one had expected. He had proved everyone wrong. Malik turned to face the class, his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind calm. For the first time in a long time, he felt something like pride. He had done it. And as he looked around the room, Malik saw something else. The other students were staring at him, not with the usual indifference, but with something else. Respect, awe, acknowledgement. But Malik wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't looking for validation. He was just looking to show the world that he was more than they thought he was. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, Mr. Harris said, trying to regain his composure, though his voice shook slightly. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik didn't respond to Mr. Harris. He didn't need to. He had already shown them all exactly what he was capable of. And from this moment on, no one would ever underestimate him again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik's hands shook slightly as he walked back to his seat. The room was still quiet, and he could feel the weight of his classmates' eyes on him. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt something strange, respect. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt it. Most days, he simply felt invisible. Just another face in a sea of students who couldn't care less about who he was or where he came from. But today had been different. As he sat down, his mind drifted back to a time long before the bell rang and the challenge started. His past had shaped him in ways that not many people could understand. It was a story of survival, of overcoming odds that seemed insurmountable. But it was also a story of love, loss, and the kind of resilience that only the toughest of people could truly understand. Malik grew up in a neighborhood where hope was a rare commodity. He lived in a cramped apartment on the south side of the city with his mother, Auntie Shonda, and his little sister, Keisha. His father had left when Malik was just a toddler, a distant memory in his life. Malik never knew him well enough to feel the sting of abandonment, but there was always this nagging feeling inside him that something was missing, like a piece of him had been taken away before he even had a chance to understand it. His mother, Tanya, worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. By day, she worked as a cashier at a convenience store, and by night, she cleaned offices to bring in extra cash. She was the backbone of their family, a strong woman who always made sure that Malik and Keisha had what they needed, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. She was tough as nails, but beneath that hard exterior, she loved her children more than anything in the world. And Malik knew it. But life in their neighborhood wasn't easy. Gang violence, drugs, and poverty surrounded them, and it was easy to get caught up in the wrong crowd. Malik had seen it all. Friends he'd grown up with getting arrested, dropping out of school, or worse, falling victim to the streets. It seemed like the world around him was set up to break him down. But his mom always had a saying that kept him going. "You're stronger than you think, Malik. Don't let this world swallow you whole. You've got something they can't take away." Those words echoed in Malik's mind as he sat at his desk in room 302. He had never told anyone about his struggles. He had never felt the need to. His classmates, most of them from more privileged backgrounds, had no idea what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck, to go to bed hungry some nights, or to feel like the world was stacked against you. They didn't know what it was like to feel like you were invisible, like you didn't matter. But Malik wasn't a quitter. He had learned early on that life wasn't about waiting for someone to give you a handout. It was about surviving, about fighting for every inch of ground you could claim. He didn't have much in the way of material possessions, but he had something more valuable, a mind that worked in ways people didn't expect. He remembered how his mom used to sit with him at the kitchen table after dinner, helping him with his homework. She wasn't a scholar herself. Her education had been cut short when she was young, but she was smart in ways that mattered. She had this incredible ability to make sense of things, to break down even the hardest problems and make them manageable. She would sit there with him for hours, teaching him how to think, how to approach challenges with patience and determination. But school wasn't always easy for Malik. At first, he struggled with reading, his mind drifting when the words on the page didn't make sense. He was never the loudest in class, and when teachers looked at him, they saw what they wanted to see. A kid who wasn't capable of much. But Malik knew better. He had always known he had something inside him. It was just a matter of finding the right moment to let it out. In middle school, Malik had a teacher named Mrs. Richardson who saw something in him that no one else did. She didn't look at him and see a kid from the wrong side of town. She saw potential, and she was the first person to push him to believe in himself. "Malik, you're smarter than you think," Mrs. Richardson had said one day after class, her kind eyes studying him as he gathered his things. "I know you don't always raise your hand, but when you do speak up, you make sense. You just need to trust yourself a little more." Her words had stayed with him, even as the years passed. She had been the first teacher to challenge him, to make him believe that he had something unique to offer the world. She had been the one to tell him that he wasn't destined to be like everyone else, that he could rise above his circumstances if he kept pushing, kept believing. But despite her encouragement, Malik still faced constant challenges. It wasn't just the academic struggles or the lack of resources. It was the constant pressure to conform, to fit into a world that seemed to have no place for someone like him. He often felt like he was walking a tightrope, always just one wrong move away from falling into the abyss. But then, there were moments like today. Moments when he realized that maybe, just maybe, all the struggle had been worth it. When he could see the fruits of his hard work, the slow and steady rise towards something better. Today, in Mr. Harris's classroom, he had been pushed to his limits, and he had passed the test with flying colors. Malik didn't fully understand why Mr. Harris had picked on him today. Maybe it was because he thought Malik wouldn't be able to solve the equation, or maybe it was because he simply didn't expect him to. Either way, Malik had shown him, and everyone else, that there was more to him than met the eye. As the class ended, Malik gathered his things slowly, his mind racing. He didn't want to leave just yet. There was something satisfying about this moment, something that felt like it could change everything. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt like he had control over his own story. "Hey, Malik," a voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his classmate, Evan. "You were, really impressive today. Didn't expect that." Malik turned to face him, offering a small smile. "Thanks." Evan nodded, still looking a little shocked. "Maybe you should join the math club or something. I mean, I always thought you were quiet, but you really know your stuff." For a moment, Malik was speechless. It wasn't the first time he had been complimented, but it was the first time it felt genuine. He had always been overlooked, dismissed. But now, it felt like the world was starting to pay attention. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to keep moving forward. As Malik walked out of the classroom, the weight of his past, his struggles, and the challenges still ahead of him didn't seem so heavy anymore. Maybe this was just the beginning. Malik woke up early the next morning, as he always did. His alarm clock buzzed insistently, but it was the faint sound of his mom's voice from the kitchen that really pulled him out of bed. Tanya had been up long before him, preparing breakfast while making sure Keisha was ready for school. Despite her demanding work schedule, she never skimped on the little things, like a warm meal to start the day. Malik rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the sleepiness, and quickly threw on his school clothes. He wasn't really excited for school today, not because he had a bad day ahead, but because he knew that after what had happened in Mr. Harris's class, everything would change. People would start looking at him differently, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. The last thing Malik wanted was for his classmates to suddenly treat him like some kind of freak show. It was bad enough that he'd been ignored for so long. But now, with the whole class witnessing his ability to solve that equation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd become the center of attention, and not in a good way. He shuffled out of his room, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen when he stepped back into that classroom. Would Mr. Harris treat him differently? Would the other students still look at him the way they used to? Or would they start expecting him to perform at a higher level now that they knew he had some hidden talent? "Malik, you're up," his mom called out from the kitchen, smiling as she flipped a pancake onto a plate. "Keisha's almost ready, but you're gonna have to help me with her backpack again." Malik smiled faintly, feeling the familiar warmth of home. His mom was always there to help, always ready to keep things together. It was the one thing that had never wavered. No matter how hard things got, she was his constant. And for all the challenges that came with their life, Malik knew that if there was one thing he could always count on, it was her. "Yeah, I'll help her," Malik said, his voice still a little groggy. He made his way to the kitchen table, where Keisha was already sitting, her school uniform neatly pressed, her hair braided just the way she liked it. She was a lot younger than Malik, but the two of them were close. Keisha didn't know much about the struggles they faced. They just lived their lives as best as they could. But Malik always tried to shield her from the worst of it. Malik helped Keisha with her backpack, making sure her lunch was packed and her homework was inside. When he handed the backpack to her, she gave him a grin that was all teeth, her big brown eyes sparkling. "Thanks, Malik. You're the best," she said with enthusiasm. Yeah, Malik said, ruffling her hair, trying to play it cool even though his heart swelled with affection. "Get to school and make sure you're not late this time, okay?" "Promise," Keisha replied, grabbing her backpack and rushing out the door. Malik watched her go, a feeling of protectiveness washing over him. He couldn't help but wish that life would be easier for her. She deserved better. She deserved a world that wasn't as harsh and unforgiving as the one they lived in. But all he could do was keep fighting, keep pushing forward so that maybe one day, she wouldn't have to face the same struggles he had. After Keisha left, Malik finished his breakfast quickly, still feeling the weight of his thoughts. It wasn't like he didn't want to go to school. He loved learning, loved the way his mind worked when it was challenged. But something about the way Mr. Harris had acted yesterday, something about the way his classmates now looked at him, made him uneasy. It wasn't just the praise. It was the expectation that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He grabbed his backpack and walked out the door, the cool morning air hitting his face as he made his way to school. The walk to school wasn't long, just a few blocks, but it gave him plenty of time to think. He passed by the usual sights: the corner store where kids hung out after school, the old diner where the truck drivers stopped for coffee, the cracked sidewalk that led him past Mrs. Jennings's house, where she always sat on her porch watching the world go by. But today, everything felt different. As he walked, he caught sight of a group of kids from his school. They were laughing, joking around, but when they saw Malik, their laughter died down. He could feel their eyes on him. He knew they had seen what had happened yesterday. The equation, the brilliance, the unexpected success. They weren't laughing anymore. "Yo, Malik," one of them called out, a guy named Jason, who was usually part of the popular crowd. "You crushed it yesterday, man. I didn't know you had it in you." Malik froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected Jason, of all people, to acknowledge him. Jason was the kind of kid who always had the latest gear, the coolest shoes, and the reputation to back it up. He was the last person Malik had imagined would speak to him after yesterday's class. Thanks," Malik said, trying to sound casual as he kept walking. "It was just a math problem." Jason grinned and fell into step beside him. "Nah, man, that was something else. Mr. Harris didn't know what hit him, right? You just came out of nowhere." Malik wasn't sure what to make of it. Jason had always been the kind of guy to ignore him, to give him a side-eye whenever they passed in the hallways. So why now? Why this sudden interest in him? "Whatever, man," Malik said, trying to sound nonchalant. He didn't want to get into a conversation about it, didn't want to draw any more attention to the situation than necessary. But Jason wasn't backing off. "You You should join the math club or something. You've got some serious skills. Malik stopped in his tracks, surprised by the suggestion. The math club? That wasn't something he had ever thought about, let alone imagined himself being part of. He was always the quiet kid, the one who sat at the back of the class and did his work without making a fuss. The math club was for the kids who seemed to have it all together, the straight-A students with the perfect grades and the even more perfect lives. People like Jason. I don't know, Malik said slowly, unsure of how to feel. I don't really think that's my thing. Jason shrugged, unfazed. Your call, man. But you've got talent. Don't waste it. Malik didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the path ahead, his thoughts swirling. It wasn't just the math club. It wasn't even the attention from Jason. It was something deeper, something that had been gnawing at him for years. His potential? He knew he had the ability to do things that no one else could understand, but it wasn't enough just to be good at something. He had to prove it, to show everyone that he wasn't just a kid from the wrong side of town, that he wasn't just a statistic waiting to happen. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start embracing what he could really do. But even as Malik thought this, a nagging voice in his head told him it wasn't going to be that simple. Not in a world that already had so many ideas about who he was supposed to be. He couldn't let them define him. The bell rang as Malik walked into room 302 the next morning. The class had a slightly different energy to it today. Word had spread about the previous day's unexpected math showdown, and everyone seemed to be whispering about it, eyes shifting toward him whenever he walked into the room. Malik wasn't sure how to feel about the sudden attention. Part of him was proud. A part of him felt like he had finally shown everyone that he wasn't just another kid to overlook, but another part of him just wanted to slip back into the background and avoid the spotlight altogether. As Malik entered the classroom, he saw that Mr. Harris was already at the front, scribbling something on the whiteboard. There was an extra buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation that wasn't there the day before. Malik wasn't sure if it was the class or Mr. Harris, but something was different. All right, class, settle down, Mr. Harris called out, his voice sharp but somehow inviting. We've got a lot to get through today. Let's see how much you remember from yesterday's lesson, shall we? Malik's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't been expecting this, but it made sense. The attention on him was about to increase tenfold. The challenge, the equation, and the way he had handled it all yesterday had left Mr. Harris intrigued. And Malik knew that Mr. Harris wasn't going to let it slide. Malik, Mr. Harris called, turning to face him with a raised eyebrow. You think you can take on another problem? I've got one that's a bit tougher than yesterday's. The entire class turned to look at Malik. The spotlight was on him once again, and the weight of their gazes made him uneasy. He could feel his palms starting to sweat, and his mind briefly blanked. His first instinct was to decline, to step back and let someone else handle it, but something inside him stopped him from doing so. Yesterday had been about proving to them that he wasn't invisible. Today, he had to prove to himself that he wasn't afraid to stand up to the challenge. Sure, Malik said, his voice steady, but internally his nerves were raging. Mr. Harris grinned, a slight twinkle in his eyes. Good. Here's your equation. He turned back to the whiteboard and wrote down an even more complex set of numbers and variables than yesterday's challenge. The room fell completely silent as everyone waited for Malik to step up. There was a murmur of whispers behind him, and Malik felt the collective curiosity of his classmates building. It wasn't like yesterday. Today, they weren't just curious. They were expecting something big. Malik stood there for a moment, eyeing the equation in front of him. He could feel the sweat on his palms, the pressure building in his chest. But then he remembered his mom's words, "You've got something they can't take away." He knew that wasn't just about his intellect. It was about his drive, his refusal to give up. So he took a deep breath and started. He scanned the equation, his mind already working through the steps. He didn't need to show off. He just needed to get it done. His eyes darted from one number to the next, carefully calculating, finding patterns, breaking it down. The key was never to rush it. If he rushed, he'd miss something. Mr. Harris watched him, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. The room was completely still, waiting for Malik to make the next move. Malik's pencil scratched across the paper as he worked through the equation, his mind racing but his hands steady. He could feel the weight of the moment. Every second felt like it could make or break him. The minutes dragged by, and slowly, the pieces of the equation began to click. He took a step back mentally and scanned over his work, checking for errors. And then, with one last stroke of the pencil, he had it. The final answer. Done, Malik said quietly. The class was still silent, and Mr. Harris walked up to the front of the room, examining Malik's paper. A moment of tension hung in the air, and Malik could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Was he wrong? Had he made a mistake? Mr. Harris slowly nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Well, I'll be damned, he said, his voice softer than usual. You've done it again. Malik felt a rush of relief and pride flood through him. He didn't know what he expected from the teacher, but hearing those words meant more than anything. He wasn't just some kid in the back of the class anymore. He had earned this moment. The class erupted into quiet applause, some students whispering to each other, impressed. Malik's face turned slightly red, and he felt awkward, not used to the praise. But something inside him stirred. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. Excellent work, Malik, Mr. Harris continued. You're starting to show what I knew you were capable of. Malik glanced at his classmates, his mind still buzzing from the rush of accomplishment. Jason, the kid who had talked to him yesterday, gave him a thumbs up from across the room. Malik wasn't sure how to respond, but the gesture felt genuine. It was the kind of respect he hadn't expected to find here. As the class moved on to the next lesson, Malik's mind kept returning to the equation. The way everything had just clicked, how he had felt in control for the first time in a long time. It wasn't just about solving the problem. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. He could be more than that. He could rise above the expectations placed on him, rise above the life that had always tried to limit him. But with that sense of accomplishment came a new pressure. As much as Malik wanted to push it aside, he couldn't ignore the fact that this newfound attention was going to change everything. People were watching now. They were paying attention. Would they keep respecting him when the next challenge came? Would he be able to keep proving himself? Malik pushed the thoughts to the back of his mind for the moment. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back. He would take each day as it came, keep proving himself, and most importantly, stay true to who he was. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, and Malik packed up his things. But before he left the room, Mr. Harris stopped him. Malik, he called out, his voice firm but encouraging. Keep this up. You're capable of more than you realize. Malik nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he might actually have a place in it. And that was something he hadn't felt in a long time. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Malik felt like he'd been through an emotional roller coaster. The math problem, the unexpected attention, and the weight of Mr. Harris's praise had left him feeling both elated and nervous. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the spotlight on him felt overwhelming. He made his way to his locker, trying to ignore the whispers and stares from the other students. Some of them were talking about the equation. No surprise there. But it was the way they spoke that caught Malik's attention. It wasn't the casual interest he had anticipated. It was something more. It was awe. People were looking at him as though he had just done something extraordinary, and Malik wasn't sure how to handle it. Yo, Malik. It was Jason again, this time walking toward him with a few of his friends in tow. Man, that was crazy in math class. You solved that problem like it was nothing. Malik tried not to show how uncomfortable he felt. He had never been one to boast about his abilities. It wasn't that he didn't like being recognized, but he was used to being the quiet kid, the one who kept to himself and stayed out of the limelight. Now, everything had changed. He couldn't deny that the attention felt strange. Thanks, Malik said, forcing a smile, not really knowing what else to say. Jason grinned. No problem, man. You know, I've been talking with the guys, and we think you should come hang with us sometime. You've got skills, and that's something we respect. Malik wasn't sure what to make of it. He had never been part of Jason's crowd. Jason had always been the popular kid, the one who hung out with the athletes, the ones who always got the attention. But now, for some reason, they were all looking at Malik differently. I don't know, Malik said, taking a step back. I'm not really into all that stuff. Jason laughed, a casual, friendly sound. No worries, man. Just thought I'd extend the invite. We're all about supporting talent around here. But hey, if you ever change your mind, you know where to find us. Malik nodded, feeling a little more at ease. He wasn't sure if he'd ever take Jason up on his offer, but it was the first time someone from that group had shown any kind of interest in him. Still, he didn't want to get caught up in something he wasn't comfortable with. As Jason and his friends walked away, Malik felt a sense of relief. He was still trying to figure out how to balance the new expectations with the old version of himself. It wasn't easy, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the attention he had gotten wasn't just from Jason and his crew. It was from everyone in school. People were starting to treat him differently. Some were impressed, while others seemed skeptical. He hadn't even noticed that his best friend, Derek, had walked up behind him until he heard his voice. "Yo, Malik," Derek said, his tone neutral but curious. "You good?" Malik glanced over at Derek, trying to read his expression. Derek wasn't the type to jump on the bandwagon just because everyone else was paying attention. He wasn't the type to care about popularity or what others thought. He was the guy Malik had been through thick and thin with. "I'm fine, man," Malik said with a shrug, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just a little overwhelmed." Derek raised an eyebrow. "I get that. You've got a lot of people watching you now, huh?" Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah, it feels weird. I'm not used to it." Derek clapped him on the back, a friendly gesture that felt comforting. "Don't let it get to you. You're still the same Malik. You don't have to change just because people are starting to notice you." "I know, man. But it's not that simple," Malik replied. "It's like everyone has this idea of who I'm supposed to be now, and I'm not sure if I can live up to it." Derek gave him a small, understanding smile. "Look, no one can tell you who you are. You're the one who gets to decide that. And if anyone tries to pressure you into something you're not, they're not your real friends. You've got talent, Malik. You've always had it. Don't let anyone change that." Malik exhaled, feeling a little lighter. Derek's words were exactly what he needed to hear. The pressure was real, but Derek was right. He couldn't let other people's expectations define him. He was still the same person, still the kid who loved solving problems and challenging himself. The only thing that had changed was the way people saw him. "Thanks, man," Malik said, grateful for Derek's support. "I needed that." Derek grinned. "Anytime, man. You know I've got your back." As they made their way to the exit, Malik's thoughts drifted to the future. The ripple effect of his math performance wasn't something he could ignore. It had already started changing the way people looked at him, and not just in school. He knew that if this kept up, it would have an impact on everything. His relationships, his opportunities, and maybe even the way he saw himself. For a moment, Malik wondered if he was ready for the challenge. Was he ready to step into the spotlight, to embrace the new expectations people were placing on him? Or was he destined to retreat, to keep his talents hidden away like they had always been before? But as he walked out of the school and into the late afternoon sun, Malik realized that he didn't have all the answers. And that was okay. He didn't need to know everything right now. The only thing that mattered was that he was willing to face the challenge, to keep pushing forward, and to figure out who he really was along the way. As he reached the bus stop, Malik noticed something he hadn't seen before. A couple of students were standing by the corner, talking animatedly and pointing in his direction. Malik couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but he could tell it had to do with him. He wasn't sure if it was a good or bad thing, but it was definitely a sign that things were changing. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready for all of it, but he was going to have to be. Malik woke up the next morning with a sense of unease that lingered long after his alarm had gone off. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if everything that had happened over the past couple of days was real. The way Mr. Harris had praised him, the way his classmates now saw him in a different light, the whispers, the glances, the increased attention. It was all too much, too fast. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, pulling the covers off and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. He was running late. A part of him wanted to skip school, just to avoid the pressure, but another part of him knew that wasn't the solution. Running away had never solved anything. So he dragged himself to the bathroom, splashed some cold water on his face, and tried to shake off the lingering feeling of dread. When he got downstairs, his mom was already in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared breakfast. Malik's mom was the kind of woman who always seemed to have everything under control, even on the days when Malik felt like everything was falling apart. She was a steady presence in his life, always supportive, always encouraging, but she could tell when something was off. "You okay, Malik?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder as he grabbed a granola bar from the counter. Malik didn't answer right away. He just shrugged and bit into the bar. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk. It was just that he wasn't sure how to explain the weight he was feeling. How could he tell her that his whole life seemed to be shifting under his feet? That people were suddenly treating him like he was something special, when all he had done was solve a math problem? "You know, I've been hearing a lot of talk around here about you lately," his mom continued, setting the frying pan down and turning to face him. "A lot of people are saying good things." Malik didn't know how to respond. The last thing he wanted was for his mom to get caught up in the hype. He didn't want her to think that this was anything more than what it was, a one-time thing. He didn't want to disappoint her if the attention faded as quickly as it had come. "I'm fine, Mom," Malik said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's just a little weird, that's all." His mom smiled softly and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know it's a lot, but remember, Malik, you're not defined by other people's opinions. You define yourself. Don't let this moment make you forget who you really are." Malik nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed her. The problem wasn't that he had forgotten who he was. It was that he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be now. The pressure was real, and it felt like it was mounting every second. Yesterday, people were talking about him as though he had done something truly remarkable. What if he couldn't live up to those expectations? What if he was just a flash in the pan? A kid who had a lucky break and couldn't repeat it? "Thanks, Mom," Malik said, offering a faint smile. "I'll figure it out." His mom squeezed his shoulder and turned back to the stove. "I know you will. Just remember, whatever happens, you've got this. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Malik gave a soft grunt in response and headed out the door, unsure if he believed his own words. But his mom's encouragement stayed with him as he walked to the bus stop, and by the time he climbed aboard the school bus, he felt a little bit lighter. At least he wasn't alone in this. The day at school started just like any other, with the buzz of students talking to each other, the sound of lockers slamming shut, and the chaotic energy that always filled the hallways. But there was something different this time. Malik felt like every eye in the hall was on him, whether they were actually looking at him or not. His ears rang with the whispers, and he could feel the pressure of everyone's expectations weighing heavily on his shoulders. When he entered room 302, things felt tense. The students were all still murmuring about him, and Mr. Harris was already at the front of the class, staring at the chalkboard. Malik sat down at his desk, trying to focus on anything but the looks he was getting. He could hear the hum of conversation around him, but it was as if he were in his own little bubble, separated from everything and everyone. Jason, who had invited Malik to hang out the day before, walked in and made a beeline for Malik's desk. "Hey, man, you ready for today's lesson? I'm kind of pumped to see what you do next." Malik blinked, caught off guard by the enthusiasm. "I'm just trying to get through the day, man," he muttered, not really knowing what to say. Jason grinned. "Nah, I get it. But seriously, you've got a gift. I think you should go for it. Keep showing them what you can do." Malik felt the weight of Jason's words. It was one thing to get recognition from a teacher, but it was something entirely different when his peers were expecting him to live up to something he wasn't sure he could. He didn't want to disappoint them, but he also didn't want to set himself up for failure. Before he could respond, Mr. Harris stepped up to the front of the room, his eyes scanning the class before resting on Malik. "All right, class," Mr. Harris said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Today, we're going to dive deeper into some of the concepts we've been working on. But before we begin, I want Malik to come up here." Malik's heart skipped a beat. He didn't expect this. Yesterday had been unexpected enough, but today? Was Mr. Harris really about to make him solve another equation in front of the whole class? "Don't worry, Malik. You've got this," Jason whispered under his breath as Malik reluctantly stood up. As he walked to the front of the class, Malik's mind raced. What if he couldn't do it? What if he messed up? Everyone was watching him now, expecting something spectacular. The pressure felt suffocating. Mr. Harris smiled at him. Let's see if you can apply what you've learned. No pressure, he said with a wink, his tone light. Malik nodded, trying to steady his breath as he took the marker from Mr. Harris. He stared at the board, the equation before him, his mind racing for a solution. Everyone was waiting. The weight of the moment felt unbearable. But as Malik started to write, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just solving a problem for the class. He was solving it for himself. This wasn't about their expectations. It was about proving to himself that he could handle whatever came his way. He took a deep breath and began. One step at a time. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he focused on the equation before him. The room felt suddenly quiet, the whispers of his classmates dying down as everyone waited to see what he would do. He had solved the equation the day before, but that was in the comfort of his own mind, in a moment of clarity. Now, facing the class, he wasn't sure if he could repeat his success. What if this time was different? What if he made a mistake and everyone saw it? He cleared his throat, pushing aside the self-doubt that began creeping into his mind. He had to stay focused, one step at a time, just like he had yesterday. With his marker poised in hand, Malik began writing down the first step of the equation. As he worked through the calculations, he could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. The weight of their expectations seemed to press down harder with each passing second. The buzz of his recent fame was turning into something more intense, an unspoken challenge that loomed over him, waiting to see if he could live up to the hype. Jason's words from earlier echoed in his head. You've got a gift. Malik wasn't sure if it was a gift or just a lucky break, but right now, he had to believe in himself. He glanced up briefly at Mr. Harris, who stood at the front of the class with a subtle smile, watching Malik with a mix of encouragement and curiosity. It was clear Mr. Harris expected him to succeed, and that added even more pressure. But for some reason, instead of cracking under the weight, Malik felt a sense of determination. Maybe it was the rush of being in the spotlight, or maybe it was just the desire not to disappoint. Either way, he couldn't let himself fall short. Step by step, Malik worked through the problem, the numbers falling into place in his mind as he wrote them on the board. The anxiety that had been threatening to suffocate him began to ease as he reached the final steps. He was almost there. Finally, he put the last number down, and the room fell silent. The equation was complete. Malik stepped back from the board, his breath shallow, as he waited for a reaction. His hands trembled slightly, but he tried to hide it. He didn't want to appear unsure, not now, not after everything that had happened. There was a pause, longer than Malik was comfortable with. Then, one by one, the students began to nod. Jason gave him a thumbs up. Derek, sitting near the back of the room, flashed him a grin of approval. Mr. Harris stepped forward, his gaze locking with Malik's. Well done, Malik. You've shown not only an incredible understanding of the material, but a lot of confidence in how you handle pressure. I think you've just set a new standard for the rest of us. A wave of relief washed over Malik, and he let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The class broke into applause, and while Malik appreciated the gesture, it only added to the growing tension inside him. This feeling of being in the spotlight was foreign to him, and though the attention felt good, it was also a little suffocating. As he walked back to his seat, he could feel the heat of everyone's eyes on him. Some of them were impressed, others were still sizing him up, but the looks were all different now. He wasn't just another student. He was the student, the one who had solved the impossible problem. Malik slumped down in his chair, trying to focus on the rest of the lesson. But his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about what this meant for him moving forward. Was he really ready for all this? Was he going to have to keep up the act of the brilliant kid, the one who solved equations with ease, just to keep everyone's respect? As the class continued, Malik tried to block out the noise in his head. He couldn't let the pressure overwhelm him. He had to remind himself that it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about doing his best for himself, about proving that he could handle whatever came his way. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, and Malik quickly packed up his things. He didn't want to linger in the room any longer than necessary. The attention was becoming too much, and he was looking forward to the sanctuary of the hallways, where things felt a little less intense. As he gathered his books, he noticed Jason walking toward him again, his grin wide. "Yo, Malik," Jason said, his voice a mix of admiration and excitement. "That was insane. You really nailed it. I'm telling you, man, you're gonna be a legend in this school. You're not just smart, you're the guy everyone's gonna want to be around." Malik felt a mixture of pride and anxiety twist in his chest. He didn't know how to respond. The idea of being a legend felt so far from who he was. It felt like a label he hadn't earned, a title that was suddenly placed on his shoulders. He wasn't sure if he wanted that kind of attention, but he didn't want to disappoint Jason either. "Thanks, man," Malik said, his voice quieter than he intended. I'm just doing my thing." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Because it looks like your thing is pretty amazing. You're not just doing your thing. You're rewriting the rules." Malik chuckled nervously, but it didn't ease the tension in his chest. He couldn't help but feel the weight of what Jason was saying. The expectations were only getting higher, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. As they walked out of the classroom, Malik's mind raced. The attention was starting to feel like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was validating. He was finally getting the recognition he had always been denied. But on the other hand, it was overwhelming. Everyone expected him to be something that he wasn't sure he could be. He wasn't just Malik anymore. He was the genius. And Malik wasn't sure if he was ready for that. The next few days were a blur of constant attention. Malik tried to carry on as normal, but it was hard when everyone around him treated him differently. It wasn't just his classmates. His teachers, even the principal, were beginning to treat him like something special, as though the equation he'd solved the day before had somehow transformed him into an entirely new person, one who was capable of things beyond anyone's expectations. Everywhere Malik went, he felt the weight of those expectations pressing down on him, suffocating him. People wanted him to be brilliant every single moment of the day. They wanted him to solve problems that no one else could, to answer questions no one else dared ask. And every time someone spoke to him with that look of awe in their eyes, Malik felt more and more like he was trapped in a role he wasn't sure he wanted to play. The strangest part, though, was how quickly things had changed. Just a week ago, Malik had been an ordinary student, a kid with no real claim to fame, just another face in the crowd. Now, he was the guy to beat. People wanted to know what he was doing, what he was thinking, what he was learning. They wanted a piece of his genius. At first, it had felt good. The praise, the admiration, the acknowledgement, it was like a drug. But now, it felt like a prison. The more people expected from him, the less he felt like himself. He was supposed to be the guy who could do anything, but the reality was far different. The weight of being constantly scrutinized was beginning to get to him. One morning, as he walked into school, Malik could hear snippets of conversation as he passed by groups of students. "Malik's gonna ace this test, no problem. Did you see how he solved that equation? Dude's a genius. I'm telling you, Malik's the future. He's gonna change the world." He couldn't escape it. The words seemed to follow him everywhere. They swirled around in his mind, amplifying the pressure. By the time he reached his first class, Malik was already feeling exhausted. But it wasn't just the attention that weighed him down. It was the constant fear that he couldn't live up to the hype. What if he couldn't do it again? What if the pressure caused him to crack? Mr. Harris was already at the front of the room when Malik entered. As usual, the teacher greeted him with an approving smile, but this time, there was something different in Mr. Harris's eyes. It wasn't just admiration anymore. There was an expectation. "Malik," Mr. Harris said as the class settled down, "I'd like to ask you to come up and solve this problem for us today." Malik's stomach tightened. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, their expectant stares like an invisible weight pressing down on him. He stood up slowly, trying to force his legs to move. He reached the board, trying to keep his cool, but the words in his head grew louder and louder. "What if I mess up? What if I fail?" He picked up the marker and stared at the problem Mr. Harris had written on the board. It was a complicated equation, one that looked like something out of a college-level textbook. His mind raced. This was no ordinary problem. This was the kind of thing that could make or break him in front of the entire class. Malik's hand shook slightly as he began writing the first step, but as soon as the numbers hit the board, a wave of self-doubt crashed over him. He had been so confident before. Why was he doubting himself now? His chest tightened, and he could feel the eyes of everyone in the room drilling into him. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. He tried to push the fear aside and focus on the equation. His hands moved automatically, guided by instinct, but the inner tension didn't ease. He had solved problems like this before, but the weight of expectation made it feel different now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Malik put down the marker and stepped back. The room fell silent. He glanced at the board, hoping he hadn't made a mistake. Everyone was staring at him, waiting for his next move. He didn't know how long it took for him to realize it, but his heart was pounding so loudly in his ears that it drowned out everything else. Mr. Harris was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward and examined the equation. "Malik," he said, his voice softer than usual. This isn't right." Malik's stomach dropped. The words felt like a punch to his gut. His palms began to sweat, and his face burned with embarrassment. How could I mess this up? The classroom was dead silent now, and Malik's mind raced. How could he have gotten it wrong? This was supposed to be his moment to shine, his chance to prove that he could handle the pressure. But instead, he had made a mistake. He looked at the board again, trying to make sense of it, but the numbers swirled together, a blur of confusion. His confidence crumbled under the weight of his own failure. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, still staring at the board. "All right, class. Let's work through this together." His voice wasn't harsh, but there was something in his tone that made Malik's heart sink even further. As Mr. Harris walked through the correct steps, Malik could feel the eyes of the class on him, waiting for him to respond, to explain, to make it right. But he couldn't. All he could do was stand there, silently, feeling smaller and smaller with every passing second. After the class ended, Malik didn't stick around. He grabbed his bag and hurried out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to face the people who had seen him fail. The pressure was too much. As he walked down the hallway, he thought about going home. Maybe if he just stayed away from school for a day, he could escape the expectations that had been placed on him. Maybe he could disappear for a while, figure out how to breathe again without the weight of everyone's eyes on him. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew it wasn't the answer. Running away would only make things worse. He had to face this, head on. He couldn't let one mistake define him, no matter how much it hurt. He just didn't know how he was going to do it. The next few days felt like a blur. Malik's mind was consumed by the events of the previous class. He couldn't stop replaying the moment when he had failed on the board. It was as though that mistake had shattered something inside him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The feeling of being untouchable, the one he had briefly felt when everyone started seeing him as a genius, was gone. He had expected the admiration to come naturally, but he hadn't anticipated the pressure that would come with it. Expectations had built up faster than he could handle, and now, every small mistake felt like a catastrophe. Everyone was watching him, waiting for him to succeed, and any misstep was met with disappointment. When Malik walked into school the next morning, it was as though the whole place had been struck by an unspoken awareness. His classmates were whispering, glancing at him every time he passed by. Jason's usual greeting was missing, and Malik found himself trying to avoid eye contact with everyone. The last thing he wanted was more attention. The whispers were sharp, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all judging him now. It didn't help that Mr. Harris had made a point to mention Malik's previous performance in class. Even though Mr. Harris didn't go into detail, it felt like a public reminder that Malik had stumbled in front of everyone. The genius label that had seemed so flattering now felt like a burden. During lunch, Malik sat with Jason and Derek, trying to keep up appearances. Jason was acting as if nothing had changed, but Malik could tell he was still in the Malik is amazing camp. Derek, on the other hand, kept glancing at Malik as if waiting for him to drop a bombshell of brilliance, like he had before. Malik poked at his food, his appetite having disappeared. He couldn't stop thinking about how quickly everything had shifted. His classmates looked at him like he was supposed to be some kind of superhero, and that expectation made him feel small. "You all right, man?" Derek asked, noticing Malik's lack of enthusiasm. You've been kinda quiet today. Malik forced a smile, trying to appear normal. Yeah, I'm good. Just tired. Jason, ever the optimist, laughed and nudged Malik. You've been solving equations in your sleep, haven't you? You're probably bored of it by now. He grinned, but Malik didn't return the smile. Malik looked away, focusing on a spot on the floor as his mind raced. What was wrong with him? Why did it feel so hard to be Malik the genius now? Was he ever cut out for it in the first place? He excused himself from the table and left the cafeteria early, needing a moment to breathe. He wandered the halls, unsure of where he was going, just trying to escape the pressure of everyone's expectations. The silence of the empty hallway was a relief. He leaned against the lockers, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. But the quiet didn't last long. A voice interrupted his thoughts. You're just going to walk away from everything now, huh? Malik opened his eyes to see Mr. Harris standing a few feet away, his arms crossed, looking at Malik with a mixture of concern and curiosity. It was as if he had known Malik would be here, as if he had been expecting this moment. I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Harris said, his voice softer now. But you've been avoiding me all day. What's going on? Malik hesitated. He wanted to snap at Mr. Harris, to tell him that he didn't need anyone reminding him about his mistakes. He wanted to scream that he was tired of the pressure, tired of being watched like he was some kind of experiment. But instead, all he could do was shrug. It's nothing, Malik said quietly. I just don't feel like myself anymore. Like everything's changed, and I don't know how to fix it. Mr. Harris nodded, walking closer to Malik. I get it, he said, his tone serious. But Malik, you've got to understand something. We all fail sometimes. We all make mistakes. But it's how you get back up from those mistakes that defines you. Malik felt the lump in his throat grow as Mr. Harris's words hit him harder than he expected. But I don't want to disappoint everyone, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to keep being the person they think I am. Mr. Harris studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. No one's expecting you to be perfect. Not even me. They admire your potential, your brilliance. But that's not the same as expecting you to be flawless every time. We all have our bad days. The key is not to hide from them, but to learn from them and grow. Malik felt the weight of Mr. Harris's words settling into his chest. It wasn't just the pressure from others that was making him crumble. It was his own fear of failing, his fear of letting everyone down. But maybe, just maybe, Mr. Harris was right. Maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about moving forward, even when things went wrong. I don't know if I can do this, Malik admitted, his voice trembling. I'm not sure I'm the person they think I am. I don't know if I can be the genius everyone expects. Mr. Harris smiled, a warm and understanding expression. Malik, no one expects you to be a genius every day. They just want you to be you. That's enough. And trust me, sometimes the hardest part is just giving yourself permission to be human, to make mistakes, to not always have it together. Malik nodded slowly, his thoughts swirling. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he didn't have to be perfect. Maybe he could be Malik, flaws and all, and still be enough. He took a deep breath, feeling a little lighter than before. Thanks, Mr. Harris, Malik said quietly. I think I needed to hear that. Mr. Harris gave him a reassuring nod. Anytime, Malik. Anytime. As Malik walked away, heading to his next class, he felt something shift within him. He wasn't sure if he had figured everything out yet, but he was starting to realize that it was okay to not have all the answers. The weight on his shoulders wasn't going to disappear overnight, but for the first time in days, he felt like he could handle it, one step at a time. The following week felt like a slow climb back to something resembling normalcy. Malik had spent most of his time reflecting on what Mr. Harris had said. He was starting to see things in a new light, but the lingering pressure was still there, like an invisible hand pushing him forward, demanding that he keep moving, keep succeeding. He had tried his best to shake it off, but it wasn't easy. At school, the whispers continued. The stares still lingered. His classmates, though not overtly unkind, seemed to regard him with a mix of admiration and expectation. There were fewer moments of quiet anymore. Instead, it was as if every room he walked into had a spotlight on him. Even though the attention was largely positive, Malik found it suffocating. One afternoon, Malik found himself sitting alone in the library, flipping through a book on advanced algebra. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy the challenge, it was the pressure that came with it. The weight of trying to be perfect, to always be the one to have the answers, was starting to feel like too much. He couldn't help but think back to the day in class when he had faltered. The feeling of being watched, the fear of messing up, it had all overwhelmed him. Even though Mr. Harris had told him that everyone made mistakes, the truth was, Malik didn't want to be just anyone. He didn't want to be like everyone else. He wanted to be exceptional. But was it possible to be exceptional without falling into the trap of perfectionism? "Hey, Malik." The voice startled him, and Malik looked up to find Jason standing at the table, a smile on his face. He slid into the seat across from Malik, his usual easygoing demeanor returning. "You look like you're buried in that book," Jason joked. "Are you sure you're not going to burn out?" Malik couldn't help but smile back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Just trying to keep up." Jason leaned back in his chair, stretching. "Man, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You're already the smartest guy in the room, no question about it." Malik felt a slight pang in his chest. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate Jason's support, but sometimes it felt like Jason didn't quite understand what Malik was going through. The constant praise, the constant attention, it wasn't as flattering as it seemed. "I don't know, Jay," Malik replied, his voice low. "It feels like people expect me to be perfect all the time. It's like the second I mess up, I disappoint everyone." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Man, you're overthinking this. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect. They just want you to keep doing what you do. They admire your genius. And that's a good thing." Malik shook his head, staring at the pages in front of him. "It's not that simple. I can't just be good enough. People want me to always have the answers. What if I don't?" Jason's face softened. "Look, I get it. But you've got to understand that people don't admire you because they think you're perfect. They admire you because you're smart and you work hard. That's something a lot of people can't do. But even you're allowed to make mistakes, dude. It's okay." Malik felt a weight lift off his shoulders at his friend's words, but it was only temporary. He knew Jason meant well, but it was hard to shake the overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was hard to ignore the constant pressure to live up to expectations, even if those expectations weren't always expressed aloud. Later that afternoon, Malik found himself back in Mr. Harris's classroom. The teacher had asked him to stay after class for a quick talk, and Malik wasn't sure whether he should be nervous or relieved. "Hey, Malik," Mr. Harris greeted him when he entered. "How've you been?" Malik hesitated. "I've been okay." Mr. Harris motioned for Malik to sit down at one of the desks. He leaned back in his chair, studying Malik with a careful eye. "I can tell you're still processing everything that's been happening. I just wanted to check in." Malik shifted uncomfortably. "I don't really know what to think anymore. I mean, one minute, people are treating me like some kind of genius, and the next, I'm scared I'll let them down. I don't want to disappoint anyone, but it feels like they're all watching me, waiting for me to slip up." Mr. Harris nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Malik, let me tell you something. You don't have to carry the weight of everyone's expectations on your shoulders. People see your potential, and they respect you for it. But that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. In fact, the best way to really grow is by embracing your flaws and learning from them." Malik looked up at him, unsure if he believed those words. "But what if I mess up again? What if they don't see me the same way?" Mr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "You know what's the most important thing about potential, Malik? It's the ability to take a step back when things get tough, to pause and reassess, to understand that growth isn't always linear. It's okay to take your time, and it's okay to stumble every once in a while." Malik felt something shift inside him as Mr. Harris spoke. The fear of failure had been clouding his judgment, but maybe the key wasn't to avoid mistakes. It was to learn from them. "Thanks, Mr. Harris," Malik said softly. "I think I needed to hear that." Mr. Harris gave him an encouraging smile. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember, you're not in this alone. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward." As Malik walked out of the classroom that day, he felt a renewed sense of clarity. It wasn't about trying to live up to other people's expectations. It was about figuring out what kind of person he wanted to be, regardless of how anyone else saw him. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a while, he felt like he was starting to figure it out. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following week was full of tension, but something had shifted within Malik. He wasn't entirely free from the pressure of being perceived as a genius, but he was slowly starting to accept that he didn't need to be perfect. Still, the doubts lingered at the back of his mind, like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. He still felt the weight of others' expectations on his shoulders, but he was learning to carry it more gracefully. Malik's teachers continued to heap praise on him, each comment reinforcing the idea that he was capable of something extraordinary. But there was a part of Malik that still felt like he didn't belong. What if, despite all the praise and accolades, he wasn't truly exceptional? What if he was just good at memorizing formulas and solving equations, but didn't have the creative spark that defined true genius? It was Friday afternoon when Mr. Harris assigned the next big project. The entire class had been given a particularly challenging set of advanced math problems designed to push their limits. It was meant to be a collaborative effort, but Malik knew this would be his chance to prove to himself that he could still be the genius everyone expected. Jason, Derek, and Malik worked together after school in the library, the tension palpable in the air. The assignment was daunting, full of intricate algebraic concepts that stretched their knowledge beyond what they'd covered in class. Malik dove into the first problem without hesitation, his mind whirring as he methodically worked through each step. Jason watched with admiration, as usual, but Derek, typically the most laid-back of the group, looked on with a critical eye. "Yo, Malik, you're seriously killing this," Jason said, his voice filled with awe as he watched Malik complete one complex equation after another. Malik didn't look up. "Just focusing," he muttered, moving from one problem to the next. Derek, who had been quiet for most of the session, finally spoke up. "I'm just saying, these are some seriously hard problems. Maybe we should slow down a bit and double-check everything." Malik's hand paused mid-air, his pencil hovering above the page. He hadn't considered that maybe slowing down was the answer. But the pressure to get everything right, to finish each equation without hesitation, felt overwhelming. "I don't know if I have time for that," Malik replied, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. "I have to finish this. We're already behind." Jason shot Derek a look, sensing the tension. "Maybe it's not about rushing through it. Malik's right. We should get it done, but we don't have to make it harder than it already is." Malik let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. It was true that he had been pushing himself too hard. Every time he made a mistake, even a small one, it felt like a disaster. He had to prove to himself that he wasn't just a fluke. He had to be perfect. "You know what?" Malik said, finally breaking his silence. "Let's take a step back. You're right, Derek. Maybe we're trying to do too much at once. I'll take a breath and recheck my work." Derek gave him a nod, and Jason smiled. They all agreed to work more carefully, moving forward with a calmer approach. Malik realized that his fear of failure had been clouding his judgment. Rushing through the problems only heightened his anxiety, and that wasn't the way to approach the work. After another hour of deliberation and group effort, the trio had solved the toughest problems. Malik, surprisingly, was the first to look over their work and admit it was good enough. "You know," Malik said, chuckling lightly, "I think this is the first time I've ever been satisfied with good enough." Jason grinned. "What did I tell you? Genius doesn't have to be perfect." Malik nodded, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Maybe perfection wasn't the answer after all. Maybe success was about embracing imperfections and working through them, step by step. As they handed in their completed project to Mr. Harris the following Monday, Malik felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced before. Sure, he still carried the weight of expectations, but it didn't feel as suffocating. He realized that his intelligence wasn't just defined by his ability to solve problems. It was also about learning how to manage pressure, how to approach challenges with confidence, and how to trust his own judgment. Later that day, Mr. Harris pulled Malik aside after class. Malik, he said, I have to admit, I was really impressed with your group's work. It was solid. But I want to talk to you about something more important than just the problems you solved. Malik raised an eyebrow. What's that? You, Mr. Harris said, looking at him intently. I've been watching you, and I can tell you've been carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders. The expectations, the pressure. It's a lot for anyone, especially at your age. But you did something today that really stood out. You took a step back, acknowledged your limits, and worked with your team. You trusted yourself. Malik felt his heart race a little. He hadn't expected Mr. Harris to notice that. I guess I'm starting to figure out that it's okay to not always be perfect. Mr. Harris smiled. Exactly. Genius isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them. And the best part is, you're learning faster than you even realize. You'll be amazed at how much more you can accomplish when you stop trying to do everything alone and just take it one step at a time. Malik's chest swelled with pride at Mr. Harris's words. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Not because he was perfect, but because he was learning how to navigate his own mind, how to accept his flaws, and how to keep moving forward. As he walked out of the classroom, Malik took a deep breath. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't need to be flawless. He just needed to keep moving forward, and that, for now, was enough. Malik woke up the next morning feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The pressure that had been suffocating him for so long still lingered, but now it didn't feel so oppressive. He had taken the first steps toward embracing his imperfections, and for once, he felt like he was in control of his journey. But even as the morning sun streamed through his window, he knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. At school, everything seemed to return to normal. People still looked at him with admiration and curiosity, but now there was a shift. The whispers didn't sting as much, and the expectations felt less like a threat. Malik was starting to relax again, focusing more on learning and less on performing. But then, as he walked through the halls between classes, something happened. Hey, Malik. It was Jada, a girl from his chemistry class. She had always been friendly with him, but lately, there was a certain way she looked at him that made Malik feel uncomfortable. It wasn't the adoration he'd grown used to. It was something different, something more intense. Hi, Jada, Malik replied, forcing a smile as she caught up to him in the hallway. What's up? I was wondering if you'd help me with the math homework for tonight, Jada said, her voice quiet but filled with purpose. You're the best in the class, and I really need to get this right. Malik blinked, taken aback. He was used to people asking for help, but there was something about the way she said it that made him uneasy. Maybe it was the weight of her words, or the way she looked at him like he held the key to everything. He wasn't sure. I don't know, Malik hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I mean, I can help you out, but I'm not sure I can solve everything for you. Jada smiled, her expression softening. I don't expect you to do all the work for me. I really need to understand this stuff. You've got such a gift, Malik. The compliment hit him like a wave. At first, it felt flattering, but then he felt the familiar pressure creeping back in. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was the expectation that he was the one who had all the answers, that he was the one everyone could rely on. He could feel the familiar knot in his stomach tightening again, the weight of the expectations pressing down. I'll try to help, but I can't promise I'll have all the answers, Malik said, his voice a little too sharp for his liking. Of course, Jada replied quickly, not noticing the tension in Malik's tone. I know you'll figure it out. Thanks. As she walked away, Malik felt a knot form in his chest. He didn't know why he was reacting this way. After all, Jada was just another student asking for help, but something about it felt different. Her admiration wasn't like the others. It felt like she saw him as more than just a student. It felt like she saw him as a solution, a way out of her struggles. And that terrified Malik. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next class, and Malik made his way to his seat, still feeling uneasy. The rest of the day passed by in a blur, each moment overshadowed by the growing pressure in his chest. He tried to ignore it, but it was hard. The moment with Jada had thrown him off balance. He thought he had been getting better at managing the expectations placed on him, but now it felt like they were coming at him from every direction, all at once. That evening, as he sat down at his desk to work through the math problems with Jason and Derek, his mind kept wandering. The conversation with Jada kept replaying in his mind, over and over again. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was starting to see him not as a student, but as a solution to their problems, a tool to help them succeed. "Malik, you all right, man?" Jason's voice broke through Malik's thoughts. He hadn't even realized that he'd been staring at his homework for the past 10 minutes, not really focusing on it. Malik looked up, surprised. "Huh? Oh yeah, I'm fine." Derek gave him a skeptical look. "You sure? You've been acting kind of off today. Is everything okay?" Malik hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know. It's like everyone expects me to have all the answers. Like I'm supposed to fix everything for them." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Jada asked me to help her with her homework today," Malik said, shaking his head. "It's not just the homework. It's like she sees me as the guy who can solve all her problems. And it's not just her. Everyone's been looking at me like I'm the answer to all their questions. I don't know how to deal with it." Derek leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Man, you've got a lot of weight on you, huh? You don't have to be everyone's solution. You're not some magic genie. People can help themselves." Jason nodded. "Exactly. If you want to help them, that's cool. But you don't owe anyone that much. You're not responsible for their success, Malik." Malik let their words sink in. Maybe they were right. He couldn't be everything to everyone. It was impossible, and trying to live up to that expectation was only making him feel more isolated. But as he thought more about it, something else clicked. His fear of disappointing others wasn't just about him being perfect. It was about his desire to be seen as something more than just a student. He didn't want to just be a brain. He wanted to be a person, someone who was valued for more than just his intellect. "I guess I need to figure out where I draw the line," Malik said finally, his voice quieter now. "I want to help people, but I can't do it all on my own." Jason gave him a supportive smile. "You're not alone, Malik. We've got your back." Malik nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders shift ever so slightly. It wasn't gone completely, but maybe it didn't need to be. Maybe all he really needed was to know that he didn't have to do it all alone. As the night wore on and Malik finished his homework, the same uneasy feeling lingered. But for the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge it without letting it control him. He didn't have all the answers, and that was okay. Malik was beginning to accept that the pressure to be perfect wasn't something that would go away overnight. In fact, it seemed to follow him wherever he went. Every time he stepped into class, he could feel the eyes on him, as though everyone was waiting for him to perform. It didn't help that his classmates were starting to rely on him more and more for answers, whether it was math, science, or even personal advice. It was flattering, but also overwhelming. The next day, during lunch, Malik found himself in the cafeteria with Jason and Derek, trying to relax. The noise around him felt like it was closing in. Everyone in his class seemed to have a question for him. "Malik, do you have the answer to number 7 in the worksheet?" "Malik, how did you solve that calculus problem?" "I can't figure it out." Even the smallest interactions made Malik feel like he was suffocating. He had spent so much time trying to be the best version of himself that he hadn't realized how much he had been ignoring his own needs. He hadn't been able to process what it meant to have others constantly looking to him as their source of knowledge. It felt like he was losing himself in the middle of all the attention. "I don't know, man. It feels like I'm drowning here," Malik muttered, pushing his food around his plate. Jason looked at him with concern. "What's going on, Malik? You've been acting off lately. You sure you're okay?" Malik ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of everything. "I don't know. It's like I can't catch a break. Everyone's expecting me to have all the answers. I just need a second to breathe. You know?" Derek, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly chimed in. "Malik, I get it. I know what it's like to feel like you have to be perfect all the time. But you've got to realize that you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry all that weight on your own." Malik looked at Derek, surprised. He had always been the more laid-back one, but now he seemed to understand what Malik was going through. "I don't know, man. I just feel like if I let go of the reins, everything's gonna fall apart. Jason nodded. I get what you're saying, but you can't keep going like this. You have to take a step back and remember that you're a person too, not just a brain on legs. Malik sighed, leaning back in his chair. I don't know where to draw the line. I want to help people, but when I'm constantly pulled in a million different directions, it's hard to focus on myself. I don't want to be selfish, but I can't keep going like this. Derek gave him a sympathetic look. Maybe it's not about being selfish. Maybe it's about setting boundaries. You don't have to say yes to everything, Malik. People will respect you more when you start taking care of yourself first. Malik considered Derek's words. He had always been the kind of person who tried to help everyone, but he hadn't realized how much it was affecting him until now. He had been so focused on meeting others' expectations that he had neglected his own mental and emotional well-being. I guess I've been so caught up in trying to prove something to everyone else that I forgot to look out for myself, Malik said, his voice quieter now. Maybe I need to set some boundaries. Jason nodded. Exactly. You can't pour from an empty cup, Malik. You've got to take care of yourself before you can help anyone else. Malik sat in silence, processing what his friends had said. It was a hard pill to swallow, but he knew they were right. He had to stop being afraid of disappointing people and start learning how to prioritize his own needs. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. After lunch, Malik walked to his next class with a heavy heart but a clearer mind. He wasn't sure exactly how to implement the changes in his life, but he knew it was time to start. He couldn't keep running on empty. As he entered the classroom, his eyes fell on Jada, who was sitting at her desk, scribbling notes furiously. She looked up when Malik walked in, and their eyes met for a moment. He felt the same pressure building in his chest, but this time, he didn't let it consume him. He had learned that it was okay to say no, to not have all the answers, to take a step back when he needed it. As the bell rang and the class settled in, Mr. Harris called everyone to attention. All right, class, I want you to take out your homework and pair up for today's activity. Malik, I'm going to pair you with Jada. Malik's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly regained his composure. He wasn't going to let the pressure of her expectations dictate his actions. He walked over to her desk and sat down beside her. Hey, Malik, Jada said, her voice a little quieter than usual. Thanks again for offering to help me with the homework. I really appreciate it. Malik smiled, but this time, there was a quiet confidence in his expression. No problem. I'll help you as much as I can, but I just want you to know that it's okay if you don't get everything right away. We can work through it together. Jada blinked in surprise, but then a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. That's actually really cool of you to say. I was starting to feel like I was the only one struggling. Malik nodded. You're not alone. We all have our moments. And sometimes, it's okay to not have all the answers. As they worked through the assignment, Malik felt a shift inside himself. For the first time in a while, he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He wasn't trying to be the genius who could solve every problem. He was just a student, working through the material like everyone else, and that felt good. The day ended on a quiet note. Malik didn't have any more encounters that made him feel like he was being overwhelmed. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had the power to define his own boundaries. He was still a work in progress, but now, he had the tools to start balancing his responsibilities with his need for self-care. That night, as Malik lay in bed, he realized something important. He didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have to be the perfect student, the perfect friend, the perfect son. All he had to be was himself. And that, Malik realized, was enough. Malik woke up the next morning with a newfound sense of determination. He had spent the night thinking about everything his friends had said to him, and the more he reflected on their words, the clearer everything seemed. It was time to stop running from his struggles. He needed to face them head-on, but this time, he was going to do it with the support of those who truly cared about him. He had learned that it was okay to have boundaries, and that he didn't have to solve everyone's problems. He had learned that it was okay to not be perfect. But what he didn't realize, as he sat in his room staring at his reflection in the mirror, was that there was still one thing he hadn't fully acknowledged: the pressure he had put on himself. He had always felt the need to be the smartest, the strongest, the best at everything he did. It was a trait he had developed over the years, not because anyone expected it of him, but because he expected it of himself. But as he looked at his reflection, he saw more than just the smiling face of a successful student. He saw a young man who had been trying to carry a weight that wasn't meant for him to bear. As Malik dressed for school, he thought about how things had shifted over the past few weeks. He had found a balance between helping others and taking care of himself. But there were still moments when the weight of everyone's expectations felt too heavy to bear. He had been so focused on not disappointing others that he hadn't stopped to think about how he was feeling. Today, he was going to make a change. He grabbed his backpack, took a deep breath, and left the house, determined to make this day different. At school, Malik's first class was English, and as usual, his mind was full of thoughts about his journey to balance. He sat in his seat, trying to focus on the lesson, but the constant hum of the classroom made it difficult. His mind kept drifting to his interactions with his peers and how he was always asked for help. He wasn't sure when it had started, but it seemed like everyone had become so reliant on him. It was like they didn't know how to solve problems on their own without him. "Malik, do you know the answer to this one?" someone asked from behind him. Malik sighed inwardly. The same feeling he had experienced the day before began to settle in his chest again. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, but it was beginning to feel like his identity was defined by what others needed from him. I think it's B," he said, glancing up at the board. He didn't even really care about the answer anymore. He just wanted to finish the class and move on. But just as he was about to sink deeper into his thoughts, Mr. Harris's voice rang out, pulling him back to the present. "All right, class. Today's assignment is a group project. I want you to work with a partner and come up with a solution to a complex problem. You'll present your solution at the end of the week. I want you to really dive into the topic, research it, and think outside the box." The moment those words left Mr. Harris's mouth, Malik's heart skipped a beat. Group projects were always a challenge, especially when he was paired with people who expected him to do all the heavy lifting. But as Mr. Harris started calling out names for partners, Malik's anxiety began to rise. "Malik, you'll be working with Jada." Malik's stomach dropped. He had spent the last few weeks trying to figure out where he stood with Jada. She was nice, sure, but there was something about her that made him feel like he was always on display. Now, they were going to be working together for a whole week, and Malik didn't know if he was ready for that. As he turned to Jada, he saw the same look in her eyes. The look that made him feel like he was the answer to everything. But this time, something was different. Malik was no longer going to let that pressure control him. He was going to set the boundaries that he had been avoiding for so long. During lunch, as they sat down at a table together, Malik tried to push aside his growing unease. Jada was friendly as always, but her eyes still carried that intensity that made Malik feel like he was being watched. "So, Malik, what do you think we should focus on for the project?" Jada asked, her voice sweet and thoughtful. Malik paused, taking a deep breath. This was it. This was his chance to set the tone for the project and the boundaries he needed to protect himself. He couldn't let this be another situation where he took on all the work while everyone else coasted. "I think we should break the project into sections," Malik said calmly, his voice steady. "We both work on different aspects, and then we meet to discuss our findings. I'm happy to help with the research, but I think it's important that we both contribute equally. Is that all right?" Jada blinked, clearly surprised by his directness. She had never seen Malik assert himself like this before. After a moment, she smiled. "That sounds fair," Jada replied. "I really appreciate you being upfront with me. I've been hearing a lot about how smart you are, Malik, and I was hoping to learn from you during this project." Malik's heart skipped a beat at the compliment, but he didn't let it throw him off. "I'm happy to help you learn, Jada, but I think it's important that we both give this our best effort. It's not just about the grade. It's about actually understanding the material." For the first time in a long while, Malik felt like he was speaking his truth. He wasn't just trying to please others. He was setting expectations for himself, and he was holding others to those same standards. As the school day came to an end, Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't that the day had been easy, far from it, but he had done something that he had never done before. He had set boundaries for himself, and in doing so, he had taken control of his own narrative. He knew that there would still be moments when the pressure would get to him, but now, He was learning how to push back against it. He wasn't perfect, and that was okay. He didn't need to have all the answers, and that was okay too. As Malik left school that day, he thought about how far he had come. He was no longer the person who was afraid to let others down. He was no longer the person who thought he had to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was Malik, just Malik, and that was enough. The week passed by in a blur of assignments and exams, but Malik's sense of self seemed more grounded than it had in weeks. The balance he had been seeking was beginning to settle into his life like a comforting presence. Yet, as much as he was starting to feel in control of his mental and emotional state, the pressure was still there, lurking, waiting to test his resolve. It came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon. Malik had just finished the group project with Jada, feeling good about the work they'd done together. They had managed to collaborate well, each taking on distinct parts of the project without stepping on each other's toes. The presentation was scheduled for the following day, and everything was ready. Malik was proud of what they had accomplished, but a part of him still felt uneasy. As Malik walked down the hallway to his next class, he ran into Sarah, one of the students who often turned to him for help with math problems. Her usual confidence was replaced by a tense expression. "Malik, hey," she called out, her voice a little too loud for the crowded hallway. "Can I ask you something? It's really urgent." He stopped, already knowing what was coming. His chest tightened, but he tried to keep his composure. "Sure, Sarah. What's up?" "I'm having trouble with this calculus problem. I just can't seem to figure it out, and I know we have a quiz tomorrow." Sarah's voice wavered as she spoke, and Malik could see the panic in her eyes. "You're the only one who can explain this to me." Malik sighed inwardly. He knew he couldn't say no. He was the go-to person when it came to academics, and letting people down wasn't in his nature. Still, something about this request felt different. He had been in this position so many times before, people coming to him for help with no regard for his own time or mental energy. And yet, he couldn't find it in himself to walk away. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. "All right, Sarah, let's find a quiet spot, and I'll help you out," Malik said, already thinking about the time he would lose helping her. As they found an empty bench in the courtyard, Malik opened his notebook and started explaining the problem to her, trying his best to be patient despite the nagging voice in his head, telling him he was neglecting his own needs. This wasn't the first time he had sacrificed his own time to help someone else, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But for the first time, he felt a shift in his perspective. He wasn't just helping Sarah because he was expected to. He was doing it because, deep down, he cared about the people around him. And yet, something in him was beginning to crack. As Malik finished explaining the problem and Sarah expressed her thanks, he felt a familiar emptiness. The kind that made him wonder if anyone would ever ask him how he was doing. Who was there for Malik, the person behind the grades, the genius, the helper? As he walked to his next class, he saw Jada waiting outside the door. She smiled at him as he approached, and for a split second, Malik was glad to see her. She was the one person he felt he could truly talk to, and over the course of their group project, he had come to appreciate their interactions more than he realized. "Hey, Malik. I was hoping to catch you before class," Jada said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I was thinking, maybe we could celebrate finishing the project tomorrow after school? I know you're probably busy, but it'd be nice to hang out for a bit." Malik felt a wave of warmth, mixed with a tinge of guilt. He wasn't sure if he could handle much more socializing right now, but Jada's smile was genuine, and he didn't want to let her down. Maybe this could be a good opportunity for him to take a break, something he hadn't allowed himself to do in ages. "I'd like that," Malik said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." Later that afternoon, as the school bell rang and Malik left for home, he found himself reflecting on everything. He had been so focused on trying to be there for others, helping them with their problems and guiding them through their struggles, that he had almost forgotten to take care of himself. The balance he had been striving for seemed like an ongoing battle, one he couldn't seem to win. That night, Malik sat alone in his room, feeling the weight of it all. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, homework questions, requests for help, and texts from friends. He had become the go-to person, and while he didn't want to let anyone down, it was becoming overwhelming. The quiet hum of his phone screen and the stillness of his room was deafening. Malik's thoughts started to spiral. Was this really the life he wanted? A life of constant giving without any room for receiving? He had friends, yes, but who was truly there for him? Who would step in when he needed help? He grabbed a notebook and began to write. It wasn't like he had ever done this before. He wasn't the type to pour his feelings onto paper, but tonight, he couldn't silence the storm in his mind. I feel like I'm carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, he wrote. I'm always the one people turn to, but when do I get to turn to someone else? I don't know if I can keep doing this. Maybe I need to say no more. But is that selfish? I don't want to let anyone down, but I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is okay. Malik paused after writing those words. For the first time in a long while, he realized something crucial. It was okay to not be okay. It was okay to need help, and it was okay to set limits. As he put the pen down, he felt a small sense of relief. He wasn't sure how he was going to navigate this new chapter of his life, but he knew one thing. He couldn't continue sacrificing his own peace for the sake of others. Tomorrow, he would take the first step in changing that. The next day, Malik woke up earlier than usual, his mind still swirling from the previous night's reflection. He had made a decision. Today, he would start making changes. He wasn't going to let himself become overwhelmed by the expectations of others anymore. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt like he could finally breathe. As he dressed for school, he tried to focus on the small victories that had already come his way. He had spoken up to Jada, setting boundaries about their group project. He had helped Sarah, but in a way that was more balanced and mindful of his time. Maybe things weren't as perfect as he wanted them to be, but they were improving. Slowly, but surely. By the time Malik arrived at school, he felt a subtle sense of calm. His first class was math, and as he walked into the room, he saw Sarah waiting outside the door, tapping her foot anxiously. She spotted him and immediately ran over. Malik, I've been thinking about the problem we worked on yesterday. I'm still not sure I get it completely. Do you have a second? For a split second, Malik considered offering to help her out again. After all, he had been the one to solve the problem for her yesterday, so why not today? But then, a quiet voice inside him reminded him of the boundaries he had promised to set. He wasn't going to let people take advantage of his time and energy anymore. He took a deep breath and faced Sarah with a gentle smile. Hey, Sarah, I know you've been working hard, but I think it's important you try to solve this one on your own. I can help you if you get stuck, but I really want you to start practicing these problems yourself. You've got the potential to get this. I know you do. Sarah looked taken aback for a moment. She had expected Malik to just give her the answer again, as he always had in the past. But something in his voice made her stop and think. Okay, I guess I can try, she said, her voice soft. Thanks for being real with me, Malik. Malik nodded, and as Sarah walked away, he couldn't help but feel a small but growing sense of pride. He had set a boundary, and he hadn't let his guilt convince him otherwise. It felt like the right choice, even though it wasn't always the easiest one to make. Later that day, Malik met Jada for their celebratory hangout. She had invited him to a cafe after school, and despite his hesitation, he had decided to go. The two of them sat across from each other, sipping on iced coffees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Malik felt like he could finally relax. So, Malik, Jada began, leaning back in her chair, I've been thinking a lot about our project. You know, you're not just smart, you've got this quiet confidence about you. You don't let things rattle you, even when they get tough. Malik felt a small flush of embarrassment. He hadn't expected Jada to compliment him like this, but instead of brushing it off, he took a moment to process her words. I guess it's taken me a while to get to this point, he said, looking down at his coffee cup. I used to think I had to be perfect all the time, like I had to solve everyone else's problems and never show any weakness. But lately, I've been realizing that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to need help. Jada's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to give his hand a reassuring squeeze. Malik, you're one of the most genuine people I know. You're allowed to have moments where you don't have it all figured out. That's how we grow. Malik smiled at her, feeling a weight lift off his chest. Maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone. Maybe, just maybe, he had been putting too much pressure on himself to be the perfect student, the perfect friend, the perfect everything. But in that moment, He realized that his imperfections were just as important as his strengths. As the days passed, Malik continued to make adjustments in his life. He had stopped giving so much of himself to others without considering his own well-being. He still helped people, but he no longer did it at the expense of his mental and emotional health. And slowly but surely, he began to see a change in how people treated him. They respected his boundaries, and in return, he was able to help in a way that didn't drain him. One Friday afternoon, just after school, Malik found himself sitting in the library, a place he had often turned to for solace. It had become his sanctuary, the one space where he could focus uninterrupted by the chaos of daily life. Today, however, he wasn't there to study or work on assignments. He had simply come to be alone, to breathe and reflect on everything he had learned over the past few weeks. As he sat at a table, jotting down some thoughts in his notebook, Jada came over and sat across from him. She smiled as she set down her bag. "You seem different lately," Jada said, observing him carefully. "Like you're actually living for yourself, not just for everyone else." Malik looked up from his notebook, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He was finally starting to live for himself, not just for the expectations placed on him by others. And it felt freeing. "Yeah," Malik said softly. "I think I'm learning to live for me." Jada's smile widened, and she gave him an approving nod. "You deserve it, Malik. Don't let anyone take that away from you." And for the first time in a long time, Malik believed her. That evening, Malik sat at his desk, his notebook open in front of him. The familiar hum of the world outside his window felt quieter now, more distant. He had taken control of his own life, and he was no longer allowing the pressure of others to dictate his actions. The journey wasn't over yet. There would still be days where he struggled, where the weight of expectations might try to pull him down. But Malik had learned something invaluable, that he had the power to say no, to set boundaries, and to take care of himself before anyone else. And with that knowledge, he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The next week brought new challenges, but Malik was feeling more grounded than ever. His decision to focus on setting boundaries was paying off, even if it was difficult at times. He found that as he prioritized his own needs, he had more energy to be the kind of friend and student he wanted to be. On Tuesday afternoon, Malik was in the library, working on an essay for history class, when he heard a voice from behind him. "Malik, you've got a second?" He turned around to find Ryan, a fellow student from his math class, standing there, looking unusually distressed. Malik hadn't spoken much to Ryan outside of class, but he recognized the genuine concern in his eyes. "Sure, what's up?" Malik asked, pushing his notes aside and giving Ryan his full attention. Ryan sat down across from him, visibly agitated. "It's my sister, man," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "She's been really sick for the past few weeks. I've been trying to help, but I don't know what to do anymore." Malik felt his heart tighten as he listened. Ryan's usually confident demeanor had been replaced by vulnerability, and it struck Malik deeply. He could see how much his friend was hurting, but Malik also knew the importance of taking care of himself. He had learned that lesson the hard way. "Have you been able to talk to anyone about it? Like your parents or a counselor?" Malik asked, offering a gentle yet firm suggestion. Ryan shook his head. "I don't want to bother them. I've been trying to handle it on my own, but I feel like I'm failing." Malik leaned forward, thinking carefully. "Ryan, you're not failing. You're doing the best you can. But sometimes, even the best of us need help. It's okay to reach out to someone when things feel overwhelming. Trust me, I've learned that the hard way." Ryan looked up at Malik, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. "You really think so?" Malik nodded. "Absolutely. No one should have to go through tough times alone. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Ryan gave a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Malik. I'll think about it." The conversation with Ryan stayed with Malik long after they parted ways. He realized how important it was to be there for others, but also how much he had to respect his own limits. He could offer his support, but he couldn't fix everyone's problems. That was a responsibility no one should carry alone. The next day, Malik received a surprise message from Jada. "Hey, Malik, I'm getting together with some of our friends after school. Want to join us? It's going to be a chill hangout." For a moment, Malik hesitated. The thought of socializing seemed overwhelming. He had spent so much of his energy recently focusing on school and his boundaries that he hadn't made time to just relax and enjoy himself. But then he remembered Jada's encouragement and how much she had supported him in recent weeks. Maybe this would be a good chance to actually take a step back and enjoy the company of his friends without feeling like he had to perform or meet any expectations. Sounds good. I'll be there. That afternoon, Malik found himself at the small cafe where he and his friends often hung out. Jada was there already, her trademark smile lighting up the room as she waved him over. "Malik, so glad you came," she said, giving him a friendly hug. "Everyone's just getting settled. Let's grab some seats." As they sat down at the table, Malik couldn't help but notice the relaxed atmosphere. It was the first time in a long while that he wasn't stressed about grades or obligations. For once, he could simply be present with his friends. The conversation flowed easily, with everyone joking and sharing stories. Malik found himself laughing along, letting go of the mental fog that had been hanging over him for so long. For the first time in ages, he felt like he belonged, not because of his intelligence or his ability to help others, but simply because he was himself. As the afternoon wore on, Malik realized how much he had been missing this feeling. He had been so focused on his academic and personal growth that he had forgotten the importance of taking time to enjoy life's simple pleasures. This was a reminder that it was okay to take breaks and have fun. Life wasn't all about striving for perfection. As they were getting ready to leave, Jada pulled Malik aside for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other day," she began, her voice soft. "It takes a lot of courage to admit when you need help. I'm really proud of you for setting those boundaries." Malik smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Thanks, Jada. It's not always easy, but I'm learning." The following week, Malik found himself facing another test, one he wasn't expecting. During his calculus class, Mr. Thompson asked the students to work on a difficult problem on the board. It was a complex equation that no one had been able to solve, and the rest of the class was fumbling through their attempts. Malik could feel the tension in the air, and he knew this was his moment to step up. Without thinking too much, Malik raised his hand. "Mr. Thompson," Malik said, his voice calm but firm, "I think I've got it." The entire class fell silent as Malik approached the board. He quickly wrote down the equation, moving with fluid precision. As he worked through each step, explaining his reasoning as he went, Malik could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. This time, it didn't feel like the usual pressure to perform. It felt different, like he was doing this because he wanted to, not because anyone was expecting him to. When Malik finally finished, the class erupted in applause, and Mr. Thompson gave him a proud nod. "Well done, Malik. You've got an incredible mind." Malik's heart swelled with pride, but this time, the feeling wasn't just about his academic success. It was about how far he had come, how much he had grown, not only as a student but as a person. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt whole. He had found balance between his intellectual abilities and his emotional well-being, between helping others and taking care of himself. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was enough. And for now, that was all that mattered. The days seemed to pass by faster now. Malik had grown accustomed to his new routine, setting boundaries, focusing on his work without letting it consume him, and allowing himself time to enjoy the little moments with friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. He had found a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. And while there were moments of doubt, Malik had learned to push through them and remember why he was making these changes. But on one particular morning, the peace Malik had fought for was about to be tested in a way he hadn't anticipated. It started when Malik was walking into his first class of the day, English. He had been looking forward to the lesson, as they were diving into a new unit on modern literature. However, as he entered the room, he noticed something was different. The classroom was unusually quiet, and all eyes were on the front of the room, where a guest speaker was standing. Mr. Williams, the teacher, saw Malik's confused expression and smiled as he greeted him. "Ah, Malik. I'm glad you could join us. Everyone, meet Dr. Spencer, our guest speaker for today. He's a renowned professor of literature from a nearby university." Malik nodded and made his way to his seat. Dr. Spencer seemed impressive. His tailored suit and commanding presence gave off an air of authority. Yet, something about him made Malik feel uneasy. He couldn't quite place it, but it was as if Dr. Spencer expected more from the students than they could give. Today, we're going to be diving into some challenging topics, Dr. Spencer began, his voice smooth and deep. Literature is not just about reading words on a page. It's about thinking, critical thinking, challenging the norms. I'm going to ask each of you to engage in discussions that might push you outside of your comfort zones. Malik's stomach tightened. He didn't mind discussions, but he knew the pressure that often came with trying to impress someone like Dr. Spencer. He shifted in his seat, trying to remain calm. Now, I'll be assigning everyone a piece of literature, Dr. Spencer continued. You'll have to present your thoughts on the material, not just summarize it. We're going to push boundaries today. Let's see who can rise to the challenge. Malik felt a pang of anxiety in his chest. The challenge was clearly meant to be difficult, and while he was confident in his ability to think critically, he couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Spencer's expectations were higher than usual. It wasn't just about the work, it was about proving something. The assignment was given to the class, a deep analysis of a famous short story, followed by a presentation that required everyone to defend their interpretations and insights. As the class filed out, Malik couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Spencer had said. In the past, Malik would have thrown himself into the assignment with the usual intensity, obsessing over every detail to ensure he nailed the presentation. But today, something was different. He had learned how to balance his work and personal life, how to avoid getting lost in the pressure. This time, he told himself, he would approach it differently. Later that evening, Malik sat down at his desk, facing the short story Dr. Spencer had assigned. He could feel the familiar sense of pressure creeping in, but he didn't let it consume him. Instead, he took a deep breath and began to read slowly, savoring the words instead of racing through them. He jotted down his thoughts as they came to him, letting the story unravel in its own time. His phone buzzed next to him. It was a message from Jada. Hey Malik, you doing okay? I know Dr. Spencer's assignment is pretty intense, but you've got this. Don't stress, okay? Malik smiled as he read her message. Jada had always been there to support him, to remind him that it wasn't always about perfection. She was right. He didn't need to stress. Thanks, Jada. I'm trying to pace myself. I'll figure it out. The next few hours passed in a blur of reading, writing, and occasional breaks. Malik found himself engaged with the story more than he expected. He began to think about the characters in a new light, seeing their motivations and flaws more clearly. By the time he finished his analysis, he felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the perfect, flawless work he would have expected from his past self, but it was his work, balanced, thoughtful, and true to his voice. The following morning, Malik stood in front of the class, preparing to present his analysis. He felt the familiar weight of nerves settle in his chest. But this time, instead of pushing those feelings away, he acknowledged them. He wasn't afraid of them. They were simply a part of the process. When Dr. Spencer called on him, Malik took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. The class fell silent, waiting for him to begin. He glanced down at his notes and then looked up at the students before him. The story we're discussing today explores the complexity of human emotions, how our fears and desires often push us toward decisions we don't fully understand. Malik began, his voice steady but calm. The protagonist is forced to confront his inner turmoil, and in doing so, he gains a greater understanding of his own nature. Malik spoke with confidence, but it wasn't the usual performative confidence he had felt in the past. This time, he was simply sharing his thoughts, his genuine response to the material. And that felt right. As he wrapped up his presentation, he could see Dr. Spencer nodding thoughtfully. The class was silent, but Malik didn't feel the pressure to fill the space with unnecessary words. He had said what he needed to say, and that was enough. Dr. Spencer finally spoke. Impressive, Malik, he said, his tone neutral but approving. You have a unique perspective. I like that. Malik smiled and returned to his seat, his heart racing with a mix of relief and pride. He had done it, not just because he had impressed Dr. Spencer, but because he had remained true to himself. Later that day, Jada approached Malik in the hallway, a bright smile on her face. You nailed it. I could tell you were in your element up there. Malik laughed softly. Thanks. It felt good to just be myself, you know? Not overthink it, just share my thoughts. Jada gave him a playful nudge. Exactly. You've got this whole balance thing down. I'm proud of you, Malik. Malik's smile widened. Thanks, Jada. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. As they walked together to their next class, Malik felt a surge of gratitude. He had been tested, pushed out of his comfort zone, but instead of falling into old habits, he had risen to the occasion with calm and self-assurance. This wasn't just about academic success, it was about personal growth, and Malik knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The following week brought a shift in Malik's routine. He was still settling into his new sense of balance, juggling school, friendships, and personal growth. Yet, as the days passed, he began to feel the weight of his decision to set boundaries more deeply. It wasn't always easy, but the moments of clarity were beginning to shine through. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Malik received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it sounded strained. Malik? It's Ryan, said the voice. Can we talk? I really need your help. Malik's heart sank as he recognized the desperation in Ryan's tone. He'd been through a lot recently, with his sister's illness weighing heavily on him. Malik could sense that something had shifted. Of course, Ryan. What's going on? Malik asked, his voice calm but concerned. I don't know how to deal with this anymore, Ryan confessed. I've been trying to take care of my sister, but it's getting worse. She's in the hospital now, and I'm completely overwhelmed. I feel like I'm failing. Malik's chest tightened as he listened. He had seen Ryan at his strongest, and now, hearing him so vulnerable, it reminded Malik of his own struggles not too long ago. You're not failing, Ryan. You're doing everything you can. You're not alone in this. I'm here for you, all right? Malik said, trying to offer reassurance. Have you talked to anyone else about it? Your parents? A counselor? You need to have someone else in your corner, man. There was a pause on the line, and Malik could feel Ryan's hesitation. I don't know, Malik. I don't want to burden anyone. I feel like I should be able to handle it myself. Ryan, Malik said softly but firmly, it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to carry all this on your own. We all need support sometimes, and there's no shame in that. There was another long pause before Ryan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should talk to my parents. Malik nodded, even though Ryan couldn't see him. I think that's a good idea. And if you need someone to talk to, I'm just a phone call away. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, Malik, Ryan said, his voice sounding a bit lighter. I think I'll talk to them tonight. I appreciate you listening, man. Malik smiled to himself as they hung up. He had learned how to set boundaries for his own well-being, but he also knew when to step up for others. Helping Ryan felt like a step forward for both of them, not just in terms of the support Malik could offer, but in how Ryan began to see that asking for help didn't make him weak. It made him strong. The next day, Malik arrived at school to find Jada waiting for him outside the library. She waved him over, her usual upbeat energy shining through despite the chill in the air. Hey, Malik. How's everything going? She asked as he approached. Pretty good, Malik replied. Actually, Ryan called me last night. He's really struggling with his sister's situation. I think he's finally going to talk to his parents. Jada's expression softened. That's good to hear. He's been holding a lot of that inside for a while, huh? Yeah, Malik agreed, running a hand through his hair. I think he's starting to realize it's okay to lean on others. I'm just glad I could be there for him, even if it was just to listen. Sometimes, that's all someone needs, to know that someone is listening, Jada said wisely. You're a good friend, Malik. Malik smiled, feeling the warmth of Jada's words. Thanks. I've learned a lot about that lately. Setting boundaries for myself is great, but knowing when to help someone else is just as important. Jada grinned. You're really growing, Malik. I'm proud of you. Before Malik could respond, the school bell rang, signaling the start of their next class. He gave Jada a quick nod, then headed to his calculus class. The day was moving forward, but for the first time in a long time, Malik didn't feel the constant pressure of trying to be perfect. He had figured out how to prioritize what really mattered: his well-being, his relationships, and his own growth. The next few days passed in a blur of classes and assignments, but Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. He had been facing his challenges head-on, and yet there was a nagging sense that a new opportunity or obstacle was on the horizon. He had become comfortable with the idea of balancing his life, but deep down, Malik knew that real growth often came from stepping into the unknown. It was during lunch on Friday that Malik's instincts were confirmed. "Malik, we need you for the mathletes team," came a shout from across the cafeteria. Malik looked up to see his friend, Kyle, waving at him frantically. Kyle was one of the best students in the school when it came to math, and he'd been trying to recruit Malik for months to join the mathletes team. Malik had always been hesitant. He wasn't sure he wanted to take on another commitment, especially since he was working so hard to maintain balance in his life. But there was something about Kyle's energy and the challenge that piqued Malik's curiosity. "Come on, Malik, you've got the skills. We've got a big competition coming up, and we need someone like you to help us out." Kyle's voice was filled with urgency. Malik hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. The old version of himself would have immediately said yes, overcommitting to yet another responsibility, driven by the need to prove himself. But Malik had learned the value of stepping back and assessing whether the commitment was truly in line with his priorities. Kyle noticed the pause and stepped closer. "Look, I know it's a lot, but you've always been one of the brightest minds in our class. I'm not asking for a huge commitment. Just show up to a couple practices, see if it clicks. You don't have to say yes right away." Malik smiled, impressed by how Kyle had respected his boundaries while still offering an opportunity. This was different. It wasn't about impressing others. It was about the challenge itself. "All right, I'll give it a shot," Malik said, his voice steady. "But no promises. I'm still working on balancing everything." Kyle grinned. "You got it, Malik. We'll be glad to have you on board." That night, Malik sat at his desk, reflecting on the decision he had just made. It wasn't about saying yes to everything, but rather choosing what mattered most in the moment. For Malik, this was a new kind of test. A test not of his academic abilities, but of his ability to stay true to the balance he had worked so hard to achieve. As he closed his notebook, Malik realized that this was the true breakthrough moment. Not just in his academic or personal growth, but in his understanding of what it meant to live fully and authentically. And for the first time, Malik was confident that he was ready for whatever came next. The following week, Malik dove into his first mathletes practice with an open mind. He had always excelled in math, but joining the team felt different than the solitary hours of studying he was used to. It wasn't just about solving equations anymore. It was about teamwork, strategy, and preparation for something bigger. And while Malik had been hesitant at first, he found himself drawn into the camaraderie of the team, especially as the competition day loomed closer. The mathletes group met after school every Tuesday and Thursday. Malik had initially committed to attending a few practices to get a feel for it, but after the first few sessions, he found himself looking forward to the meetings. There was something energizing about the way his teammates interacted. Everyone was so sharp, and the discussions about different approaches to problem-solving were intriguing. Malik had always been a lone wolf when it came to studying, but now he was starting to appreciate the value of collaboration. One afternoon, Kyle pulled Malik aside during practice, his usual grin replaced by a more serious expression. "Malik, you're really stepping it up," Kyle said, handing Malik a piece of paper with a series of complicated equations on it. "I know you're just getting started, but I think you've got what it takes to be a real asset to the team. The competition is next week, and I want you to feel ready. We're counting on you." Malik glanced at the equations, feeling the weight of Kyle's words. He had always enjoyed math, but now it felt different. There was a sense of pressure building. Being a part of this team meant more than just showing up and contributing. It meant pushing himself beyond his limits. "You're not worried, are you?" Kyle asked, reading Malik's expression. Malik hesitated before responding. "Honestly, a little. I've got a lot on my plate right now. I'm trying to balance school, work, and, well, everything else. I don't want to let you guys down." Kyle clapped Malik on the back, his smile returning. "Don't stress. We've all got your back. You don't have to be perfect. Just bring your best self, and that's more than enough." Malik appreciated Kyle's encouragement, but the pressure still lingered. For the first time in a while, he felt like he might be juggling too many things at once. The commitment to mathletes was demanding, and it added another layer to an already packed schedule. But the more he worked with the team, the more Malik realized that this wasn't just about the competition. It was about testing his limits, finding his balance, and proving to himself that he could take on new challenges without losing sight of his growth. The night before the competition, Malik couldn't shake the nervous energy building in his chest. His room was filled with open textbooks, scribbled notes, and practice problems that he had gone over 100 times. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but he still felt uncertain. Was he ready? Would he be able to handle the pressure? He checked his phone, scrolling through messages from his friends and teammates, each one offering words of encouragement. Jada had sent him a message just a few hours ago. "You've got this, Malik. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself, and you'll do great. I'm proud of you." Malik smiled as he read her words. It was just the reminder he needed. He had been so caught up in the pressure of the competition that he had forgotten why he started in the first place. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about pushing himself, embracing the challenge, and doing his best. The day of the competition arrived, and Malik felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he joined the mathletes team on the bus to the event. The drive was filled with light-hearted conversation and jokes, but Malik could feel the underlying tension. Everyone was on edge, especially as they neared the competition venue. It was a large auditorium, filled with teams from various schools, all gathered in anticipation of the event. Malik's heart raced as they entered the building. Kyle nudged him as they walked toward their assigned seats. "Just remember, this is just another problem to solve. You've done the work, you're prepared, and now it's time to show it." Malik nodded, trying to push away the anxiety swirling inside him. The team took their seats, and the atmosphere in the room was electric. It was impossible not to feel the weight of the competition, but Malik reminded himself that this wasn't about the outcome. It was about the journey, the growth that had come with it. As the competition began, Malik threw himself into each problem, focusing solely on the task at hand. The pressure was intense, but he had trained for this moment. Every equation he solved was a step closer to proving to himself that he was capable of balancing multiple responsibilities, staying grounded, and still achieving success. By the time the final round approached, Malik's nerves had settled. He had realized that the pressure wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. With his teammates beside him, Malik had solved difficult problems, shared strategies, and contributed to the collective effort. No matter what the final score was, he knew he had given it his all. As the judges tallied the scores, Malik looked around at his teammates. They were all smiles, high-fiving each other, regardless of the outcome. Malik realized that this was the real reward. The bond they had formed through teamwork, perseverance, and mutual support. "All right, folks," the announcer called out. "Let's find out which team took first place." Malik's heart skipped a beat as the announcer read off the names of the top 3 teams. When they announced the first place team, Malik's jaw dropped. "Team Westbrook High, congratulations," the announcer exclaimed. The mathletes team erupted in cheers. Malik found himself laughing and hugging his teammates, disbelief and joy washing over him in equal measure. They had won. Against all odds, they had done it. Later, as they boarded the bus for the ride home, Kyle turned to Malik, his face lit up with pride. "You did it, man. You were incredible up there. You helped us win this thing." Malik shook his head, a smile on his face. "We did it, Kyle. We all did. I couldn't have asked for a better team." As they drove back to school, Malik sat back in his seat, reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about how far he had come in his journey. He had learned the importance of balance, of knowing when to step up and when to take a step back. And most importantly, he had learned that it was okay to embrace the pressure, because it was the pressure that brought out the best in him. In the weeks following the competition, Malik felt a shift within himself. Winning the mathletes competition had been a huge accomplishment, but it wasn't just about the trophy or the recognition. What mattered most was the journey, the personal growth he had experienced, and the realization that he could balance his ambitions without losing sight of what truly mattered. The day after the competition, Malik sat down with his parents at the dinner table. The usual chatter about school, friends, and current events filled the room, but Malik's mind was elsewhere. He had been reflecting on his journey, the lessons he had learned, and the challenges he still faced. He knew that this was only the beginning. He was no longer the same person he had been just a few months ago. "You've been quiet tonight, Malik," his mother observed, placing a dish of mashed potatoes on the table. "Something on your mind?" Malik looked up, meeting her gaze. "I've just been thinking, Mom, about everything that's happened these past few months. The mathletes, the changes in my life. I feel like I'm on the verge of something big." His father, who had been listening attentively, nodded. "You've worked hard, Malik. You've shown us all how much you've grown, and it's clear that you're figuring things out. We're proud of you." Malik smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for his parents' unwavering support. He had struggled to find his place in the world, but now, with their encouragement and the lessons he had learned, he was starting to feel like he was on the right path. "Thanks, Dad," Malik said softly. "I've learned a lot about balance, about taking care of myself, and about knowing when to step up and when to step back. I think I'm ready to take on the next challenge." His mother reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "Whatever comes next, we'll be here for you. Just remember that you don't have to do it all alone." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had been so focused on achieving his goals that he had forgotten the importance of leaning on others for support. But now, he realized that true strength came not from doing everything on his own, but from building a network of people who cared about him and supported him in his journey. The next day at school, Malik was walking through the hallway when he spotted Jada near her locker. She was laughing with a group of friends, her energy as contagious as ever. As soon as she saw him, she waved him over. "Hey, Malik, you did awesome at the competition. I heard about the win," Jada said, giving him a playful nudge. Malik grinned. "Thanks, Jada. It still feels surreal. I wasn't sure if I could pull it off, but we did it. The team was amazing." "I'm so proud of you," Jada said, her smile warm and sincere. "You really proved that you could do it, and you've grown so much along the way." Malik felt a sense of pride swell within him as he looked at Jada. She had been there for him when he needed it most, offering support and encouragement without judgment. It was moments like these that reminded him how lucky he was to have such a strong support system. "Thanks," Malik replied. "I couldn't have done it without the people around me, though. You've all helped me get here, in one way or another." Jada's smile widened. "That's the thing, Malik. You did the work, but you've also surrounded yourself with the right people. That's a huge part of success." As they continued to chat, Malik realized how far he had come. He was no longer the same person who had been afraid to ask for help, afraid to step outside of his comfort zone. He had learned that success wasn't just about achieving goals. It was about the people you met along the way, the lessons you learned, and the growth you experienced. The following weekend, Malik sat down with Ryan at a local cafe. Ryan had been on Malik's mind ever since their conversation a few weeks ago, and he wanted to check in on him. Ryan had been through a lot recently with his sister's illness, and Malik knew that the road ahead would be tough for him. "Hey man, how've you been doing?" Malik asked as they sat down with their drinks. Ryan let out a deep breath. "Honestly, it's been rough. My sister's still in the hospital, and things aren't getting any easier. But I've been trying to take it one day at a time." Malik nodded, understanding the weight of Ryan's words. He knew that no matter how much support you had, the burden of a loved one's illness could feel overwhelming. But he also knew that Ryan had the strength to get through it, even if it didn't always feel that way. "You're doing the best you can, Ryan," Malik said, "and you don't have to carry it all on your own. I'm here for you, just like I always have been." Ryan looked at Malik, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I appreciate it, Malik. It's just hard sometimes. I don't know how to keep going when it feels like I'm losing everything." Malik reached across the table, placing a hand on Ryan's. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Life's messy, man, but we get through it together. You've got your family, your friends, and me, and we'll be here for you, no matter what." Ryan's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, Malik saw a glimmer of hope in his friend's expression. "Thanks, Malik," Ryan said quietly. "That means more than you know." As Malik walked home later that day, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. His life was no longer defined by stress, pressure, or the need to constantly prove himself. He had learned that the most important thing in life wasn't success or accolades. It was the relationships you built, the support you gave and received, and the ability to keep moving forward, even when things got tough. Malik knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be obstacles, challenges, and moments of doubt, but he was no longer afraid of them. He had faced his fears, learned from his experiences, and emerged stronger on the other side. As he gazed at the sunset, Malik smiled to himself. This was only the beginning of his journey, and he was ready for whatever came next. As the end of the school year approached, Malik couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired over the past few months. From the doubts he had about his place on the mathletes team to winning first place at the competition, it had been a journey filled with highs and lows, challenges and triumphs. But one thing Malik knew for certain was that he had grown. It was the last week of school, and the air was filled with the buzz of final exams, graduation parties, and the excitement of summer break. Malik had just wrapped up his final exam when he noticed a familiar face standing near the lockers. It was Mr. Jennings, the teacher who had once dismissed him as just another student who didn't measure up. At first, Malik had felt resentful toward Mr. Jennings for the way he'd treated him in the past. But now, with everything he had accomplished and the confidence he had gained, he realized that their interactions had been a catalyst for his growth. If it hadn't been for that initial challenge, Malik might never have pushed himself as hard as he had. "Malik," Mr. Jennings called out, his tone more friendly than it had ever been before. Malik walked over, surprised but also curious. "Mr. Jennings, what's up?" "I just wanted to say congratulations on your mathletes win," Mr. Jennings said, his voice sincere. "I know I gave you a hard time at the start, but you really proved yourself. I've been watching your progress, and I'm impressed." Malik blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. Mr. Jennings had never been the most encouraging teacher, so this felt like a genuine moment of recognition. "Thanks," Malik said, a little taken aback by the compliment. "It wasn't easy, but I had a lot of support, and I guess in the end, it paid off." "You've earned it," Mr. Jennings said with a small nod. "Sometimes it takes a little push to realize your full potential. I'm glad you found that in yourself." Malik couldn't help but smile. "I guess you were right in a way. I did need that push, but I'm more than just that moment now. I've learned a lot, and I know there's more ahead." Mr. Jennings seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering Malik's words. "I think you're going to do great things, Malik. Keep challenging yourself, and keep learning. You've got the drive." Malik felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The animosity that had once defined his relationship with Mr. Jennings had faded. This was more than just a teacher acknowledging a student's success. It was an acknowledgement of growth, of overcoming barriers, and of reaching new heights. "Thanks, Mr. Jennings," Malik said again, this time with a sense of gratitude that felt deep within him. "That means a lot." As he walked away, Malik realized just how much he had changed. He wasn't the same kid who had walked into Westbrook High a year ago, uncertain of his place and unsure of his potential. He had taken on challenges, learned from his experiences, and come out stronger because of it. The following evening, Malik met up with Jada, Kyle, and Ryan at the park to celebrate the end of the school year. They had all come a long way since the start of the semester, and Malik couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for each of them. They had been more than teammates or friends. They had become a family. "I still can't believe we won the competition," Jada said, tossing a frisbee into the air. "That was one of the best moments of my life." "Seriously, it was incredible," Kyle added, slinging his arm around Malik's shoulders. "We all worked so hard, and it paid off. Malik, you were the star of the team." Malik chuckled, shaking his head. "I couldn't have done it without you guys. It was a team effort, and that's what made it special." Ryan smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Yeah, we all made it through, even when things were tough. I don't think I could have gotten through everything with my sister without you guys. You made me feel like I wasn't alone." Malik nodded, his heart swelling with appreciation for the bond they shared. "That's what friends are for, man. We've all had our struggles, but we've had each other every step of the way." As they sat together, talking and laughing into the evening, Malik realized that he had finally found his place. He had learned to embrace the pressure, to trust in himself, and to lean on others when he needed it. And most importantly, He had learned that success wasn't just about winning or achieving. It was about growth, relationships, and the journey that shaped him along the way. The sun was setting as Malik made his way home. The warm glow of the evening sky matched the sense of peace he felt within. It had been a year of change, challenges, and triumphs. But as he looked ahead to the future, Malik knew that this was only the beginning. There would always be more challenges, more opportunities for growth. But now, Malik felt ready for whatever came next. He was no longer afraid of the unknown. He was confident in his abilities, in his support system, and in the lessons he had learned along the way. As he walked through the door of his house, his mother looked up from the kitchen, her face lighting up with a smile. "How was your day, Malik?" "It was great, Mom," Malik replied, his voice full of warmth. "I feel like I've come full circle. I'm ready for whatever comes next." His mother smiled proudly. "I'm so proud of you, Malik. I knew you could do it." Malik nodded, his heart full. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without your support." As he sat down for dinner, Malik felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but he knew he was prepared to face it. The road had been tough, but it had also been transformative. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?